is there a good way for us to predict the future? So the first question I want to pose to you, maybe you have some special insights. How do we predict the future? What's the best way for us to predict the future? If you want to know how well you're going to do when you look for a job, or how well you're going to be in 5 years, or how things are going to be in Hong Kong, or if you want to invest in a stock, what's a good way for us to predict the future?
Based on current and past experience.
Yeah, whatever tools you have. So can you say a little bit more?
It's like computer data and find like a trend.
Okay. Let's take an example. So if looking at the future of your personal path, like what would you do in order to try and understand that?
Maybe I look at, in terms of my career,
okay.
What courses I'm taking.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what courses you took, how well you performed, and then maybe there's like a trend, a linear trend where you plot this somehow, we analyze some statistics, and then we see what's likely to happen. Good. What's a good way to improve that? So we have like a baseline. We use some data of what happened before, what's happening with us now, and we try and plot like a path towards the future. Is there a way to improve this? Yeah.
I think Bruce focus on the future perspective.
Yeah.
We can look into the future perspective as well, like maybe do a mapping based on the news coverage.
Okay.
Like maybe the current trend of technology, how the industry would in turn like affect the future career. I think that's also one of the important parts to consider.
Good. So how do we go about doing that? How to plot the media? How to analyze this?
I think we can do some news clips, like
clips.
Like what are the most discussed topics like currently? I think that's insightful.
Okay. Good. So we ourselves sit down, go through, I don't know, TikTok, YouTube, try to make a sense of that. And then after a certain time of investment, we try and analyze this in order to have some insights. Yeah, that's like a path. Good. Anything else that we can do? What's another way to do? We want to increase certainty. We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. What's a good way to do that?
Try this, like small scale.
Yeah, try different things, pre-test a little bit to see if it's a future path. So Bruce can try a little bit of this path and that path and see based on that. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, because if you want to predict the future of a really large scale event, you need to do it like with the tests first.
Okay. Can you give me like an example what we can do?
Vaccination.
Vaccination, yeah.
I want to test the effectiveness of a new vaccination when you do a trial on a small group of participants.
Okay, good. Yeah, great. All right, so these are things that are under our control. We want to make sure like a vaccine works, and then we try it on a small place, randomized control trial, see how it happens, and then we can try and predict based on that how things will go when we go large scale in society. Yeah, good. So I think when I pose this question to different people have different techniques. In Hong Kong, when I was doing my PhD, the number one technique when I asked people, how do I know if I'm going to finish this PhD? How do I know if I'll get a job after the PhD? What was the best recommendation that I got? I was recommended, and then I started doing this on an annual basis, to go to Wong Tai Sin and take the sticks, right? And then one stick comes out. You take the stick, you go to a fortune teller, you get this really nice bracelet. So I collected for each year, I have a different bracelet. And then they will tell me whether I am going to do well in my PhD or not. And they guarantee results. So they guarantee that their prediction is going to be accurate. How do you feel about this method? Why do you laugh?
Superstition.
Superstition? What makes this superstition? Maybe they went on YouTube and TikTok and plotted the media path to see how I'm doing. I don't know. Why is this superstition? What differentiates this superstition from other things, randomized control trials and media analysis?
There's no data.
there's no data. There's a lot of data. There's the stick, all the gods in the temple providing, my date of birth, the hour that I was born, the alignment of the stars, right? All the data that we need. What else makes this a little bit different? There's no evidence. If you ask the fortune teller, she says she has a lot of evidence. It has worked every time somebody comes to her, she has given the right prediction. What kind of evidence are you looking for? Scientific based? Yeah, good. So it's interesting to talk to people about how they make predictions. Walk into any jockey club, gambling place, or which horse is going to come out, right? They have all sorts of ways in order to analysis that they're doing, some gut intuition. So we want, for the sake of effective altruism or our own path, to try and predict the future more accurately. And there are all sorts of cognitive, psychological factors that impact us. And we want to put this to the test. So today we will focus on how to make good predictions, how to make good evaluations, how to increase the chances that the predictions that we have are accurate. So that when we compare one charity to another charity, when effective altruism tries to do the most good, that they will know with high certainty that something may or may not happen in the future, to quantify things a little bit more. So first we'll do some tests on ourselves in order to see how our predictions are, even regarding things that we're not so sure about. Perhaps some of you have inside information. If you do, don't tell others. But we'll start with a very simple question. And this is the question. I'll ask you to help me out with going on the Mentimeter and having a prediction. And the prediction is this. I don't know if you're familiar with the Old Testament, but I think both Jews, Christians, and Muslims really care about the Old Testament. It's the first thing that came out. The New Testament came later, so that's not included. This is Jesus and the disciples. That's out of it. And then came the Quran. And then, so they build layers on top of the Old Testament. But the Old Testament is this scripture collection of books about the story of the Jewish people back in, between 2,000 to 5,000 years ago. So the question here is, how many books are in the Old Testament, in the Bible? Try and estimate by giving a range, a low bound, and a high bound. So even if you don't know, but you have a hunch because you've interacted about this before, maybe you read something, maybe social media, I don't know. How many books are there? So try and make an estimate, lower bound and upper bound, have a range, make sure that this, the number of books will be included in that range with a 95% certainty, okay? Make a prediction. Next question I want to ask you is the following. Africa, large continent, how many countries are there in Africa? A lower bound and an upper bound. Try and estimate this with 95% certainty. Yeah. So when I ask you for a range, what do you do with the range? It's supposed to kind of indicate our uncertainty, right? So if we're very uncertain, what will happen? It's going to be a very wide range. If we're more certain, especially if we know exactly what the answer is, it's going to be very precise, right? All right. So there's a very nice TV show called Brain Games. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a really fun TV show. I really recommend it. They do all sorts of things by taking cognitive biases and psychological factors and showing people in real life what happens. So I'll just play this clip and see whether your prediction was right or wrong.
Don't believe your brain is overconfident? Deception specialist Apollo Robbins is hitting the streets with a game designed to prove you wrong.
I want to play a game with you real quick.
Apollo is going to ask people on the street some trivia questions, and you can play along at home.
That's a good start, huh?
You don't have to know the exact answer to each of the questions, but just give a range that you're completely confident encompasses the answer. For instance, if I ask you how many continents there are, and you're not sure of the answer, but you think it's around 7, all you have to do is come up with a range of numbers that you're confident includes the right answer. like 4 to 12. Got it?
Okay.
Ready for the first one? I guarantee it's harder than you think. This is the Bible. How many books make up the Old Testament? Remember, all you have to do is pick a range. Are you feeling pretty confident in your answer? Because we're pretty confident you just got it wrong.
The number of books in the Old Testament. It's a range.
10.
So we're going to say 10 books in the Old Testament. And the high number there could possibly be? 15.
7.
7, okay. And how high would you go?
25.
What do you think? Do you have your range? The answer is 39.
It's actually 39 books in the Old Testament.
All you had to do was give a range that could, without a doubt, include...
What do you think the class did? Okay. Do you think we did okay? Okay, let's have a look. What was our range? Yeah, so we did pretty well. Good job, us, right? Great. All right. So they did not take into account Hong Kong University students.
that number. Not so easy, is it? Let's try another. How many countries are in Africa?
The number of countries in Africa?
17.
17. What's your high answer?
30.
30.
Yes.
Okay.
0.
And high?
I'll say 24.
Do you have your answer? Are you confident the correct answer fits within your range? The answer is 57. So how'd you do? Better this time?
Oh.
How did we do? Did we do okay or not? Okay, let's see the next one. Oh, we missed it. And actually, it's the same like yesterday. Yesterday, I don't know why, but people got the Bible right and they got Africa wrong. So what's the point of this whole thing? It's this.
Sorry, you missed on that one.
Getting killed.
What exactly does this game have to do with overconfidence? Think about it. You likely had no idea for certain how many countries were in Africa.
So why would you limit the range you gave? Even a little bit.
Almost all of our participants gave extremely small ranges, even though they didn't have a clue. Now are you catching on? You don't need to know the answers to any of these.
Length of the Mississippi River in miles. What would you say the low is?
1.
1? Okay, I think you got part of the system down. High?
3,000.
And submit. Bingo, you got one right. See?
Yeah, I'm getting
You see
this
what the
game.
system is?
Yeah.
You just need to give a big enough range. If any of these answers fell outside your ranges, that means that like 79% of our participants, you suffer from overconfidence.
So what's the reason for such a high level of overconfidence? One possible explanation for what we call the overconfidence effect is that there's a constantly raging battle inside your brain. One way your brain can resolve this battle is to hide the fact that you're incompetent.
Yeah, so I wouldn't go as far as saying that we're incompetent, but we have all sorts of little quirks in the way that we think about statistics or probabilities. And there's lots of evidence on this. This is one of the classic findings by Fishoff, who is a big name in judgment decision making, with other big names like Paul Slovic, Liechtenstein. This is from 1970s about overconfidence. What they did back then, which we are going to do soon, is we're going to go over general knowledge questions about what is the right answer to something that is a trivia. And then they asked them first to choose what is the most likely answer from a multiple choice. So resembles a bit a multiple choice exam like the ones that you have at HKU. But then also asked them how confident are you in your answer. It was really interesting to see the kind of answers that people gave and the kind of confidence rating that they had on this. So 2-3 years ago, we actually did a replication of this. So 2 teams of 2 Hong Kong University students from this class designed a replication of this. And we ran this with 2 different samples. And we just gave exactly the same questions from the 1970s to people right now. So the ones that, of course, are still relevant, and many are. And as you can see, these were very successful replications. We replicated this twice. So with this American sample, both of them are American? Yeah, American, but different platforms. So from this American sample, 560 participants, we found that this replication generally found the same findings as the original article. So we're talking like 50 years later. As overconfidence was not exhibited when a subject had a low confidence, but was exhibited when a subject had high confidence. So it seems like the more confidence that people had, the more likely it is that they had overconfidence and they got things wrong. So confidence was associated with just being more wrong on things. So overconfidence overall for the high confidence range. Same results for the other sample. Overall, we found strong empirical support for the overconfidence hypothesis. Overconfidence was exhibited at higher confidence levels, while overconfidence were exhibited throughout all the confidence levels. So in one of the samples, it was even stronger than the other. And not just these names, but of course, Daniel Kahneman talks about overconfidence a lot, and he speaks against overconfidence. This is his summary of why overconfidence is such a big problem in our society.
You know, society rewards overconfidence. We want our leaders to be overconfident. I mean, if they told us the truth about the uncertainty, we would discard them in favor of other leaders who sort of give an impression that they know what they're doing. We want overconfidence, we support it, we sustain it, and there is an awful lot of it. I mean, most of what we read in the paper is overconfidence. Sometimes it's catastrophic. Just about every war that you see, I think that's a general rule, there are optimists among the generals, and there are optimists on both sides. And that is true for a lot of litigation as well. So a lot of conflict is fed by overconfidence. There is an interesting story here of two biases that work in opposite directions. So one familiar, you can call it bias, but is what we call loss aversion. People put a lot more weight on negative events than on positive events, on losses than on gains. So that's one principle. You know, if people are to gamble money on the toss of a coin, and they stand to lose $100, they will demand more than $200 to accept the gamble, which is in some ways ridiculously risk averse. So people are loss averse. On the other hand, they're optimistic. And so many of the decisions that people make, especially in starting new businesses, I mean, that is where it's been studied most extensively. People think they will succeed. They open a restaurant because they think they will succeed. But in fact, less than a third of small businesses survive for 5 years. So clearly, overconfidence is rife. And overconfidence and loss aversion seem to be acting in opposite directions. You have to distinguish the perspective of the individual from the perspective of society. I think for society, it is probably very good that we have a lot of optimistic entrepreneurs. I mean, you know, who think they will succeed, although most of them fail. And most of them really do not know the odds. It is not true that they know the odds and they take the risks willingly. Many of them, most of them probably, do not know the odds. From the point of view of the individuals, it is not always good to be optimistic. For example, I have no interest whatsoever in my financial advisor being an optimist. You know, I don't care for that. For an entrepreneur, it may be a good thing to be an optimist because it will make him or her persevere more. We know that being an optimist is useful under some conditions. It is not always useful in making decisions.
Yeah, so it's interesting that we reward leaders or fortune tellers that tell us that they can guarantee that they'll predict the future, that they will take care of everything. If I go to a fortune teller, or if I listen to some candidate for presidential elections, and they tell me, we might be able to solve this, but we might not. There's a 67.8% chance that I will be able to address the situation. Or the fortune teller, you might have this path, but you might also have that path. We'll probably discard them and we will not vote for them or visit them again. But we tend to go for those that really exhibit the confidence of knowing the future and being able to tackle things. But obviously, this has a lot of problems. So we should reward more careful, humble ways of predicting the future, or the ability to tackle questions, but we don't often have that. So a really good book came out, I think, 3 years ago, called Perfectly Confident. This is Don Moore, and he tries to battle both overconfidence and underconfidence. So we've talked about overconfidence and the problems with that. He also tries to explain what is the problem with underconfidence. So it's not about, whether you're too overconfident or underconfident. It's more about like calibration. It's how well calibrated you are, whether you know how good you are or bad you are. So here's a bit from him to talk about these issues.
Hi, I'm Don Moore, author of Perfectly Confident, and I've been studying confidence and overconfidence for over 20 years. My research has examined the different manifestations of both overconfidence and underconfidence. They're predictable circumstances under which most people believe that they're better than others. For instance, when I ask my students to rank themselves relative to the rest of the class with regard to honesty, about 80% of the class claims to be in the top half. Their views, while obviously erroneous, might nevertheless be justifiable if we consider the fact that most of us are honest about most things most of the time. Moreover, we can't be quite as certain about others, since we only observe what they say and we cannot know whether they truly believe it. So it's reasonable to believe that we're more honest than others. On the other hand, those very same students believe that they're worse jugglers than their classmates. The majority of them put themselves in the bottom half of the class. Most of them cannot juggle, but they suspect that some among them may have had a prior career in the circus, so it might be reasonable to think that they're worse jugglers than their classmates. Overconfidence is a real problem, but so is underconfidence. In the words of Teddy Roosevelt, I am just as little disposed to give way to undue pessimism as to undue and arrogant optimism. Both our virtues and defects should be taken into account. Overconfidence prompts us to take risks that will fail or claim more than we deserve. These are errors of commission. On the other hand, underconfidence prompts errors of omission. We avoid opportunities, competitions, and ventures in which we could have succeeded. Both are errors. The alternative? Calibrate your beliefs accurately. You should believe the truth.
Yeah, you should believe the truth. But that's easier said than done, right? How to know what the truth is. So we'll do an example. This guy, Spock, do you know Spock? Have you heard of Spock before? Who is this? Star Trek, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about Spock for those who are not familiar? What's...
I'm still familiar with Spock.
Okay.
I only know the show.
Okay, yeah. Anybody know who this guy is? Spock? So on the left, you've got like my generation, or even like my parents' generation. And on the right side, you've got like the more recent version of Spock. So Spock is an alien. What are you doing?
Okay.
Oh, you know this? So what is this?
Like science reading? I forgot what it's for.
Yeah. So here's this famous pose. Actually, it's very interesting, the roots of this. But yeah, this he does live long and prosper. So this is the Vulcan way. So he's an alien. He's born to a couple. He's half Vulcan and half human. And in the show, he's really struggling with his human side. So the Vulcan society is completely rational. There are no emotions. Everything needs to be a bit like a robot, cold considerations of just looking at statistics and facts. But because he has a human side, he always struggles with how to overcome the emotions. In the TV show, Star Trek, humans are very reckless, emotional, gut instinct. So he's helping James T. Kirk, who is the captain, and always like jumps ahead, runs into danger, doesn't think, just everything with a lot of passion and heart. And Spock tries to balance him a little bit by telling him, you should follow rationality, you should follow facts, you should follow my advice. Right? So an interesting exercise, since we've analyzed TV shows before, is to also analyze this TV show to try and understand how well calibrated is Spock, right? So we can look at his predictions and we can see what happened afterwards with his predictions. And the person that did this, it was written in this book, Scout Mindset, came out 2 or 3 years ago, around the same time as Perfectly Confident. Julia Galef is less of an academic and more of an effective altruist. So she was one of the big figures when effective altruism came up, and she is a consultant. She helps people calibrate their predictions. She's involved with a lot of prediction markets and activities within the effective altruism movement in order to try and help them to do better in predicting the future, in doing more good, doing good better. So she gives this exercise about trying to understand how well calibrated you are. So she decided to do this for Spock. So she watched all the Star Trek episodes and she tried to code what does Spock say and then whether this happened or not, and then check. And we're going to do a very similar exercise very soon, which is an exercise that she devised, and she gives this to others in order to help them to try and better calibrate their predictions. So here's an example from her book, and this is from the more recent Star Trek movie that came out. So there's lots of scenes, very interesting scenes there. You've got Captain Kirk and you've got Commander Spock, and they always run into danger. There's lots of aliens out there, all sorts of things to battle. So here in this scene that she talks about, chapter 6. So they run into danger. So there's a hot on the tail of 3 enemy ships headed straight to the center of a city where they intend to detonate a super weapon. So of course, aliens are very evil and they're trying to do all sorts of bad things. And then Kirk's right-hand man, Commander Spock, yells at him, "Captain, intercepting all 3 ships is an impossibility. There's no way that you're going to catch up to these 3 ships in time in order to prevent them from detonating the super weapon." So an impossibility is like there's absolutely no way for you to do this. So the words sound so much authority in there, so definitive. And yet less than 60 seconds later, Kirk has found a way how to maneuver in front of the enemy ships, stopping them with his own ship's hull before they reach their destination. So Spock made a prediction that is completely impossible, and then 60 seconds later, it turns out to be wrong. And there's a lot of examples of this. So she writes, "I went through all the Spock's appearances in Star Trek, which is terrific. I found 23 instances when Spock made a prediction." So she plotted those. And it turns out that when Spock thinks that something is impossible, it actually happens 83% of the time. When Spock thinks that something is very unlikely, happens 50% of the time. When Spock thinks that something is unlikely, 50%. And finally, when Spock thinks that something is more than 99.5% likely, then it only happens 17% of the time. So the interesting thing is to try and plot this. So you can see this perfect calibration. So if Spock has the right kind of calibration, so he communicates to James T. Kirk the right kind of level of confidence, then everything would be on this, on the straight line, this linear line. When he thinks that something will happen with a 70% accuracy, and then it actually happens with 70% accuracy. So this is like the closest one to this. But you can see here that when he thinks it's likely 100%, but it only happens 17% of the time, this is a problem, right? It's also a problem when he thinks that something is not going to happen, and then it happens 83% of the time. So we have a big calibration problem. And it's important for us to know whether we're calibrated. If Spock would take a second and look at all the previous episodes where he made a mistake, then maybe he can help James T. Kirk just make better predictions about what actually is going to happen, rather than just stopping him all the time and preventing him from reaching a solution. So we've got different problems. We've got underconfidence. You should increase your level of confidence. And we've got overconfidence. You should decrease your level of confidence. And then here, we've got people who are very well calibrated, but they're on different ranges. So this person here, for example, only predicts between 40 to 60%, and they're right. They're most of the times they're like guessing, so they are between 40 to 60%, but that's not very helpful for James T. Kirk. So if James T. Kirk needs to know whether you're confident, not confident, is this going to work or not, it's better to have something like this, somebody who's decisive and well calibrated. So knowing how well you know things, but also being able to make predictions with high certainty. So we've got here the forecast between 80 and 100%, always being correct about your level of certainty. Yeah. So we're going to do Julia's exercise. This is a multiple question quiz. For people who are in the Zoom, it's actually on our OSF, so you can download this from the OSF. So you can have a quick look at the questions. And what's important here is not for you to get things right, because obviously many times you just don't know. But when you make a guess, maybe too many. But when you make a guess, make the right kind of guess. It's printed awkwardly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Yeah. So we've got questions here about all sorts of things. You also can get one if you want. You don't need one, right? Okay. Yeah. So first I want you to just have a quick look at this and make a prediction. How many of these 40 questions do you think you will be able to answer correctly? Make a prediction about how many of those your classmates are going to be able to answer correctly. And then on the right side, you can see the level of confidence between 55% and 95%. So the aim for you is not to have as many accurate as possible. Of course, that would be nice, but there's no way of knowing. Some of this is a bit like guessing. Your goal is to be well calibrated. So when you don't know something, just adjust your level of confidence according to that. On the other side of the page, later, we will actually check whether you're calibrated or not. So for each one of the categories, when you say that you're 55% sure, we will count the number of times that you were correct and the number of times that you were incorrect. And then we will see whether it's close to 55%. Okay? So first we go through this, we write the answer, we write the level of calibration, and then we check our answers. Later we will check our calibration. Okay, is this clear? All good? All right. For those on the Zoom, maybe I'll just show you where this is. Yeah, so you can find it here. It's on this one. Now go one by one and give yourself whether you're right or wrong. All right, here we go. Ready? Some are pretty easy, I guess, but some are very difficult, very difficult. Happens next is the interesting part. Now you can really check your level of calibration. If you could also go on the Mentimeter and also write down for me how many you actually got correctly so that we can see your estimate about yourself and others, whether you got that correctly. Okay, let's see how much how your predictions were about yourselves and about others. Let's go back one and see what you predicted. So you predicted that you will get correctly 22 and you thought a little bit better of your classmates, 24. How many did you actually get correctly? Okay. On average, 21. Look at this, like highly calibrated. All right. Good predictions. All right, so did you plot everything? Yeah? So if we go back to our presentation, if you're above the line, then you're a little bit underconfident. Maybe next time you need to kind of adjust a little bit. And then if you're under the line, overconfident. And I saw with some of you, there's a combination, a little bit of both of those. So you might be very overconfident about your 95%, and you might be a little bit underconfident about your lower side. So this is very much in line. with what we saw in Fish-Off and in the tour applications by HKU student. So I think it's good for us to try and experience this. Just before we go on the break, I want to show you this platform. It's called MetaClios, and it's by a group of very influential people, effective altruists, and we use this all the time in order to predict the future. So when we want to predict the future, we put a question up on this platform, and then we have a lot of people trying to predict that. Over time, we get to see who are the good predictors, who is better at predicting, and we call those super forecasters. And over time, people build a reputation, a brand. So you might not think of social psychology as something that's related to this, but actually there's a whole branch in social psychology that deals with how to become super forecasters. How can we make better predictions? What you see here, this amazing forecaster, is an AI. This AI is by that platform. And the AI tries to take all the super forecasters and based on all the aggregate, all of them together, the question of individual versus team, tries to make predictions. And you can see that back then, when I did this, I think that was last year, 2022, you can see that it's almost perfect calibration. So if I'm a charity in effective altruism and I want to know something about global warming, or I want to know something about a solution, or I want to know something about the future with a certain level of certainty, then I will post this on that platform. So I will just show you what that looks like. You can see that here in 2022, the AI, based on super forecasters, has answered 1,200 questions, and a little bit underconfident. So the AI needs to still improve. So if we go on the track record to see how the AI is actually doing right now, we'll see that over the past year, they've improved the AI, and also the super forecasters became even better at what it is that they do. You can track all the predictions and everything that they've done, and you can see that now it improved from 10% underconfidence to 6% underconfidence. The more questions that it answers, and what's nice about this is that they run tournaments. So I'll just show you some examples for tournaments, and you can participate in any of those. You can sign up for a profile, you can compete, receive some money if you want, and build up your brand. And a lot of different things about climate tipping points, politics, economics. This is the one that I am related to the most because it has to do with replications. So Spencer Greenberg, who has a great podcast, also took it upon himself. He got a big donation from an effective altruist that wanted to make science better and told him, I want you to try and do a replication of every big paper that comes out from Science, Nature, JPSP, Psychological Science, and see with this whether this replicates or not. So if we go to this Transparent Replications, it's an amazing website. They do a bunch of stuff. So I replicate the classics. They replicate everything new that comes up. And they want to hold people accountable. But before they run the replication, they start a prediction. So here we can see, for example, how many claims from study 4 of the JPSP paper will replicate. So people make predictions. You can see over time the predictions that they make, and then at some point this resolves, and then the people that made the highest accuracy get paid for whatever was offered for that. So I'll show you some examples of what this looks like, how they predict politics, how they predict economics, and so forth. But this is the #1 platform that people use, and it's amazing to see the dynamics and how people improve over time and what happens. So you make money, but you also build a brand. All right, so let's take a 5-minute break, come back, and I'll show you some of these super forecasters and how to become one. Here's a very quick summary from Don Moore about the key to success on how to be calibrated.
In the self-help literature, you could come away with the impression that the key to success is to keep your confidence up. You've got to believe in yourself against the doubters and the haters who would tear you down. But that's crazy. Maximizing your confidence sets you up for all sorts of mistakes. Believing that you cannot fail will lead to humiliating losses in contests that you cannot win. Thinking that everybody loves you can make you an arrogant jerk. The drivers who believe that they can navigate heavy traffic at high speeds while texting and eating are not those with the longest life expectancies. On the other hand, if you read the decision-making literature, you could come away with the opposite impression, that we're all vulnerable to overconfidence, and your real challenge is to keep your confidence down to avoid taking too many risks. But that's not right either. Underconfidence is common, and it scares us away from undertaking ventures, initiating relationships, and taking risks that would have been successful. The solution is to find the middle way between overconfidence and underconfidence. The recommendation I make in my book is that you should believe the truth. This is not a recommendation to lower your sights. All of us have vast untapped potential. But intentionally diluting yourself in an attempt to be optimistic can get in the way of you realizing that potential. Instead, my book provides tools for thinking rigorously about future possibilities and taking smart risks with positive expected values.
Yeah. So I think that's a good summary of this whole thing. So the literature is a little bit biased, overconfidence, underconfidence. People talk about different things. Really, the middle way is the way to go. And for a very long time, we've tried to understand what makes people forecast better. Who is the person who is able to have the middle way? And Philip Tetlock, who is a big name in social psychology, actually teamed up with the CIA, the NSA, DARPA, all the US big agencies in order to try and understand how to make better predictions. So if you put an NSA analyst, a CIA analyst versus a layperson, who is going to make better predictions? And what they found really shocked them. So they had prediction markets where they invited laypersons, no special skills, nothing extraordinary, very little information. And they pivoted them. They had them compete against analysts from the CIA. And they found out that actually there is a certain group of people, these super forecasters, that actually do much, much better, 30% better than the biggest analysts with a lot of experience and all the exposure to all the sensitive information. How are these people able to do the magic that they do? Tetlock gives a lot of different advice on this. This is his summary to that. And I'll also show you one of the super forecasters, how they explain what it is that they do. Okay, let's start with the super forecaster. What does he have to say about how he does this?
I think that bottom line, intellectual curiosity and just a willingness to put in the work and to think hard about specific problems and try to be as objective as possible is what allowed me to make more accurate forecasts than others within the pool. I wouldn't necessarily say that, what we did or what I did as an individual is the best possible at forecasting, because there can be so many more improvements, I think, in terms of how much you know about a specific subject. You can always improve your level of knowledge, and I think you can always improve, how you're specifically viewing a situation, how that situation could potentially evolve. So having a greater understanding of how humans interact with each other, relate to each other, the political contours of specific situations and events, those are all things that you can gain greater knowledge on and get better at forecasting in. So
what I like about this guy, two things. First of all, it really talks about the need to be objective. So putting your own opinions and your own beliefs, your own background to the side and focusing on just like the facts. The second thing that I like about this guy, but also many of the other super forecasters, is that they're very, very humble. Even though they do really well, they do much better than analysts with a lot of experience. They're not bragging. They're not like, I am the best, I just have superpowers. They're just like, yeah, I know some things, but I still have some room to improve. So even though he is one of the best in that pool, he still aims to do better.
Being open-minded and being open-minded enough to realize that you need to remain open-minded, I think are some of the keys to being, for my own forecasting performance.
Yeah, so this whole hour of interviewing them, I'll try and summarize this for you. This is from the book, from Tetlock's book on super forecasting. they give different elements. They summarize this, and I tried to put this for you in one slide. From those elements, there are some elements that I think are the most based on the research that we see since the book came out. So here we can see in philosophic outlook, they tend to be very cautious and humble. And definitely you can see that when you kind of see their interviews with them, very, very carefully, very, very cautious. Open-minded is something that comes out a lot. There are all sorts of other things like intelligence and reflective and numerate. So how comfortable you are with numbers. All these are skills that you can improve. Intelligence is a little bit more fixed. But I think being open-minded about seeking out new skills, new abilities, challenging yourself is something that comes out a lot. Here we've got pragmatic, analytical, thoughtful, and all that. But I like the last one, good intuitive psychologist. So if you know about loss aversion, if you know about the optimism, if you know about overconfidence and underconfidence, if you read the literature, if you follow up on that, read what it is that is done, credible stuff with replications, large scale, registered reports, and all that, then you'll be able to adjust in order to improve and do better. So not just having good intuitions of psychological factors, but also embedding yourself in science and facts. There are all sorts of other things that he writes in the books that I don't completely agree with. I don't think there's a lot of support for this. So a growth mindset, we don't have a lot of evidence for this. And instead of grit, I think a better title for this is conscientiousness. So one of the big five, just being very dedicated, following things through and doing things carefully. So here's an example from Tim. This is a description of Tim. He started off very slightly on the side of yes, and when the question opened, which made sense at the time, the target number was high, but the situation in Syria, so this was a prediction about the refugee situation unfolding in Syria at the time. Then Tim changed his forecast 34 different times, and you can see how the changes happened over time. And you can see that it's not major shifts between yes to no. So from one side of the 50% to the other side of the 50%. There were minor adjustments up and down. The biggest adjustments was just like this one here, only a shift of between 10 to 15. But overall, the average one was about 3.5%. You can see that over time, very small incremental steps, many different changes, and then finally until the situation resolved. So if you go to this super forecasting platform, Metaclus, it's not just you make one prediction and then you leave it. You can update things as stuff evolves. So if you want to know stuff about, I don't know, presidential elections coming up next year in the US, if you want to know something about the Ukraine war, if you want to know something about this region, you will be able to track probabilities and update your knowledge so everybody can see how things happen, unfolded over time. So let's hear it from Phil Tetlock. I hope that this by now is loaded. Yes, let's open this.
We know virtually nothing about the forecasting track records of famous pundits because famous pundits virtually never make falsifiable forecasts. They say something might happen or could happen or may very well happen. But when I say something could happen, that doesn't mean a lot. I mean, it could be that it could happen that we're all going to be vaporized by an asteroid in the next 24 hours, or it could be that the sun will rise tomorrow. That could subsumes an enormous range of possible probabilities. So if I say something could happen and it does happen, I can say to my readers, well, you know, I told you it could. And if I say something could happen and it doesn't happen, I can come back to my readers and say, well, I just said it could. One of the interesting things about super forecasters is how opportunistic they are. Super forecasters think quite strategically about when it makes sense to invest effort in thinking. So if you wanted to predict the outcome of the presidential election in early October 2015, the 2016 presidential election, how would you go about it if you were a super forecaster? A super forecaster wouldn't look carefully at the presidential debates and look into the eyes of the candidates and see which one looks more presidential. At some point in the process, a super forecaster might do that. But a super forecaster would tend to start with more the outside view and gradually work in rather than start at the inside and work out. So they would ask very general questions initially, like, well, let's look at elections, all presidential elections since World War II. How likely is a Democrat or Republican to win? Or they might say, after the one party has held the presidency for 2 terms, how likely is there to be a transition? Or they might say, if economic growth is less than 2% in the 3 quarters before the presidential election, does that bode ill for the party that controls the presidency? So they would start off with these more general estimates, these more outside view estimates, and then they would gradually adjust in response to estimates about the popularity polls of candidates, which are notoriously volatile at this stage of the process. But they would take them into account, but they would discount them considerably because they are so volatile, and then they would adjust incrementally. So the best forecasters, I think, over the course of 2015, have somewhat lowered their probability estimates of Hillary Clinton being the next president of the United States. I think they started off significantly above 50%, and there's been some significant hemorrhaging of those estimates, but nothing all that dramatic. I mean, the interesting thing about super forecasters is they're very patient, and they make granular belief updates. So they don't suddenly say, oh my God, the latest email scandal, or is Biden going to come into the race, or is this or that. There are these little clues, and it's not that they ignore them, but they tend to respond very incrementally to them. So it may be the probability of Hillary Clinton becoming the next president of the United States moves from 45% to 43% in response to an Inspector General report in the State Department, that sort of thing. So the best forecasters tend not to make it onto television. They're not very attractive to the TV producers because they're much more likely to say, on the one hand, on the other hand, and then now we have to strike some kind of integrated balance. And that apparently doesn't make very good television.
Yeah, so there is something to be said about humility. So Julia Galef also has a lot to say about this. The way that she summarized this is change your mind a little at a time, recognize you were wrong, makes you better at being right. And if you're not changing your mind, then you're doing something wrong. So scout mindset, she talks about 2 mindsets: the soldier mindset, where you just follow what it is, your preconceived beliefs. And then you've got the scout mindset that keeps challenging what it is that you know and seeking out the truth. If you want to do this for yourself, there are some tools out there and some apps that you can install on your phone. So if you want to know how well will I do in advanced social psychology, how well will I do in the other courses, how good of a predictor am I for my own future, you can make predictions in advance and then afterwards resolve this for yourself and see what your calibration is regarding your own life. And then perhaps that means that over time, you'll be a better assessor of what would be the right options for you. Should I go down this path or down that path? So the last session that we're going to have in this course, we're going to talk about careers. So we're going to sit together in a circle and talk about what are the possible paths for us and what is it that we might want to do. Within an optional session. Not everybody has to come, so it's completely up to you. But we're going to talk about how do we make predictions about what would be good for us, what would do well for our happiness, do well for our pocket, do well for society in doing more good. And here with this platform, the one that I showed you just before, we can look at all sorts of topics. So I'm actually, how do we question? Yeah, so we can search for all kinds of questions. So if we open Trump, there's like a lot of questions about Trump. So if the presidential elections is Trump versus Biden, will Trump win? So right now, you've got 612 predictors, but you can see there's lots of predictors. There's lots of, so we have 1,400 predictions. We've got a lot of comments, so a lot of heated debates. You can see over time, things go up and down the community prediction. So I think the highest was like 52, but then goes down to like 40%. It's interesting because this is not completely in line. If you look right now at the polls in the different media, actually it seems like Biden versus Trump, things don't look very good for Biden, but super forecasters here have a slightly different take on things. So you can like look at all their comments and how they're trying to make better predictions and all the sources of information of polls that they're sharing with one another. So all of them are actually trying to help one another in order to do better and make more accurate predictions. So very interesting platform. If there's something about, let's say, economics, is the interest rate going to go up or down? This would be a good platform for you to explore that. Much better than just going to some biased news media, Bloomberg, and then seeing what Bloomberg is going to say on these topics. Right. How do I use this? I use this for science. So we do prediction markets, which means that we run replications. Before we run the replications, we go on these prediction markets and we offer people money to predict whether Bruce is going to have a good, solid, successful replication or not. So if you have a thesis, you can go here, it's for free. You can set up your hypothesis in your thesis before you collect the data, and you can ask, what's your prediction about whether this is going to be supported or not? Lots of papers coming out on this, predict science to improve science. This is an example for a lot of papers of people doing prediction markets. Actually, I run this in two different ways. I run this both on Twitter, where you can just have simple polls, but you can see here that people predicted the level of success and failure, and then I compare this to whether it actually resolved as being successful or not. But over here on the left, these are economists that said, do you mind if we run prediction markets on the replications at HKU students? And I said, yeah, let's go for it. So you can see that here, for example, is that will the replication of this identifiable victim effect Hogarth and Rito experiment to obtain an effect in the same direction as the original study? And 54 said there's a 54% chance of this happening. So you can see them betting. So the way that we do this, we give participants $50, and then if their prediction is accurate, then they can at most double this. So a real way to make money just by making predictions. We've had all of these different targets. So very interesting comparing the prediction markets from The Economist to the Twitter to Meta Clues. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about, and relates back to Spock again, is how did Julia Galef decide that an impossibility is 0%? Actually, there's a lot of variation in how we interpret words. So what does it mean when somebody says very unlikely? From 0 to 100, what is very unlikely? Maybe if I ask you, you will say very unlikely it's 10. Maybe if I ask you, you will say 30. Maybe I ask you, maybe you'll say 50. I don't know what is very unlikely to you. So one other branch of social psychology tries to understand when people say a certain word, what is it that they're saying? And actually, the first paper that was ever published in 1964 was by a CIA agent who was trying to understand when he says to the president, Mr. President, it's very unlikely that nuclear missiles are going to be launched from Cuba. What does the president understand? Does he understand 10% or 40% or 60%? What does he understand? So the first one that they actually did is here. So they tried to ask people, what does it mean to you? Almost certainly. And you can see almost certainly is just below 100, but you can see it unfolds all the way down to some people say 60. If you can say things like we doubt, you've got a big range. Some people say almost 100, some people say 30%. So sometimes we just need to understand how people talk about probabilities, right? So when you make predictions, rather than saying very unlikely or I doubt that this will happen, maybe just give a number. Say exactly what it is that you predict, just like what happened in our exercise, 55%, 75%, 95%. And then you'll be able to check yourself, because it's very difficult to check yourself when you just use these words. So this wraps up predictions of the future, how we can predict the future a little bit better, how effective altruism is trying to balance these long-term charities, comparing them to short-term and more immediate solutions. So a lot of different tools that you can apply both to doing more good and also to improving your own lives. So this kind of brings everything together, showing you that really social psychology can have many different domains. We touch on different things, how to interpret words, how to make predictions, how to go about happiness and gratitude. So interesting. Whatever it is that you're into, there's probably something for you to do in social psychology research.